Hi, my name's Russell. I'm a mortgage and protection advisor. I'm 10 years experience in industry, last 3 or so years on my own, and really without income protection and selling it on a regular basis, I just don't think I would be sat here today still running my own firm. It was probably about 4 or 5 years ago with a previous employer that income protection for me really came to life, and it became one of the main sort of stalwarts of the cover and the portfolios that I would put together for my clients. My portfolios now for my clients tend to start with income protection first, get the life insurance in there as well and put that to bed, and then allowing for any budget on top. That's when we start talking about critical illness cover. And really putting income protection first has made the difference for me in terms of running a successful business or not, in my opinion. I think sometimes those premiums that come with those really chunky critical illness policies can put people off from the outset. It's a complicated product sometimes for clients to understand. But the way income protection works is fairly straightforward. It's quite an easy one for clients to buy into. And then it's really easy to build a portfolio around that. And as I said, for me, I think it's been one of the main reasons why I'm still here today advising and haven't gone back into sort of more traditional employee type roles.
Hello, and welcome to day 3 of Income Protection Awareness Week, where we'll be walking you through a sales masterclass to equip you to overcome any objections you may face when having income protection conversations. Of course, following yesterday's session on preparing for successful meetings and thinking about those preemptive strikes that you can make, we're certain that with all these tips, objections will be few and far between, having normalised the protection conversation with your clients. However, we are realistic that in the current context where all discretionary spend is under scrutiny, being fully prepared for how client conversations could go is really important. And today is all about giving you the confidence to approach these conversations, feeling confident and focused on reaching a great outcome for your client, with them understanding that that's exactly what you've done. Before we get started, a couple of reminders for you to share your thoughts on LinkedIn. IPAW works best when it's interactive and a shared experience, so tell us what you think and what points stand out to you using the hashtags Let's Talk IP and IPAW 2023. We look forward to seeing what's landing particularly well for you. Of course, by watching today, you won't just be picking up hints and tips by the bucket load, you'll also be eligible for an hour of CPD just for attending. Win-win. Your certificate will be emailed to you automatically after the event. I'm thrilled that today we have 2 highly qualified and enthusiastic protection coaches to take you through a successful sales process. To make the session extra enjoyable, you'll also be hearing from your peers about the objections they most commonly hear and how they overcome them, and the session will be upbeat and interactive thanks to the inclusion of plenty of role plays where you can see the difference that the techniques we'll be discussing make. So I've teased the fact that we have 2 coaches for you today. It's time for me to hand over to them. I'm thrilled to introduce Matthew Chapman, the Protection Coach, and Gary Waters from the Protection Academy.
Hi, and welcome to day 3 of IPAW. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Absolutely. Today's going to be a lot of fun, right, Gary?
I think it's going to be. So, today we're going to be talking about objection handlings. You know, those pesky little things that people say that throw you off your game and that they use as excuses to try and get out of taking out income protection.
Absolutely. Gary and I are going to cram the next hour with our best tips, ideas and responses to help you guys overcome the more common IP objections that you're going to hear or would have heard before when you're making your recommendations. Now, you'll probably recognise a lot of them, actually.
Yeah, so no doubt. As sales coaches and former advisors, we've heard almost all objections and every excuse under the sun.
We certainly have. And over the years, we've both hopefully built up this library of appropriate responses and clever techniques that we use to overcome them.
And today we plan on sharing some of our best techniques with you so that after today, you can enter any protection conversation feeling confident that you can handle whatever IP objection comes flying your way.
Absolutely. So whether you're brand new to advising or even if you have years of experience discussing IP with your clients, this session is designed to give you a whole new level of confidence and all of the necessary skills to bat off the common excuses that clients tend to make.
Right then, so let's get cracking.
Now, before we get started, let's do some quick introductions. Now, as Gary said, we're both sales coaches, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Chapman. I'm both the founder of The Protection Coach and an absolute income protection fanatic. You see, I believe income protection forms the cornerstone of any good protection advice recommendation. Now, having been an advisor and having worked with the IPTF for many years now to raise awareness of IP and how best to sell it to clients, I'm here today to share my knowledge and to help you guys overcome the types of objections and challenges that have been stopping you from writing more income protection, which, as I say, I believe is the most important of the protection products that we have to offer our clients.
And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gary Waters, founder of the Protection Academy. Now, 24 years ago, I unfortunately got to experience firsthand what can happen when you fail to protect one of your customers. It's not something I'd wish on any other advisor. So since that day, I have been laser focused on making sure that that never happens to a customer again. And I agree with Matt that IP is the foundation of any good protection advice.
So, introductions out of the way, let's first consider what objections are and why they arise in the first place.
The great idea, Matt. So, what are objections? Well, objections are the things that clients say to try and avoid taking out the cover you're recommending. Things such as, I don't need it, or I've never been off sick, or I can't afford it, or I've already got good cover with work.
Now, these types of objections can really derail your advice and they take the wind out of your sales. They can seriously dent your confidence and they make it very hard for you to move forward with your client.
Yeah, they really can. And so we need to have methods and techniques for tackling them. How do you normally deal with these type of objections, Matt?
It's a really good question. Now, to be honest, I don't tend to come across these types of objections much anymore. And I imagine it's probably the same for you, Gary. And that's because, truthfully, when you learn to position protection, particularly income protection, properly to clients, objections rarely appear.
Yeah, this is so true. The thing about income protection is that it's so easy to sell. I mean, who doesn't need an income? So if positioned properly with clients, IP objections should actually be a thing of the past. But until then, let's focus on how to handle the common ones that do come up.
Yeah, before we start, I would like to say that in my opinion, objections aren't really objections at all. They're just concerns that haven't been dealt with or questions that haven't yet been answered. Now, if a client raises an objection, it's just that you haven't done enough to highlight the value of the plan or the importance of IP in helping them to protect everything they care about. Now, a good advisor preempts these types of objections, and as we're going to show you later on, overcome them before they even get raised.
Yeah, I totally agree, Matt. So objections are simply issues that you need to expand on or push back on so that the clients can ultimately reach the same conclusion as you. That IP is a no-brainer for them.
Absolutely. So how's today's session going to work then, Gary?
So Matt and I have been working together to agree on a list of what we think are the top objections you're likely to face when making IP recommendations to your clients. We then took the list and prepared our own favourite techniques for overcoming each of them, which we're now going to share with you today. We'll start by naming an objection, discussing that objection and why it tends to come up, and then Matt and I will each share our preferred ways of overcoming that objection.
Absolutely. And we've even gone to the trouble of creating some case studies and example calls for you to highlight both good and bad examples of how you can overcome these common client objections. Now, I'd like to say thank you to the awesome advisors from IPTF's 7 Advisor campaign who gave up their time to help us record some of these examples. So what do you reckon, Gary? Shall we dive in?
Let's go for it. Okay, so objection number 1, I can't afford it.
Oh, now this is a really good one, right? So I can't afford it. That comes up quite a lot, I imagine, for lots of advisors. Now, typically, I think this comes up because the advisor's just not focused enough on the value of making sure someone's all got an income, right? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. If the customer is objecting like that, the advisor hasn't done enough work at the start to build up the importance of IP before presenting their advice.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, because I think if you realise how important income is to you, you sort of the value of it almost becomes irrelevant. It's like you pay whatever you pay to make sure you've always got an income in the bank, right? So how would you typically deal with that then? If you came across that objection, how would you deal with it? I can't afford it.
So with IP, to help overcome it, I always use visual aids. They're far more impactful than words, and combined with words, it's a weapon. So I like to use the ABI's Percy the Protection Calculator.
Okay.
So it's visually striking. The drop from salary to benefits is so powerful that you can see customers locked on the screen. So I always share the screen whilst presenting my advice. It's also got just enough detail on there, like benefits they will drop down to add impact when the customer's trying to wriggle out or object.
Wow, that's really, really good. And what else? Is there anything you'd say to them at this point?
Now, what I also do is always preempt the advice. So you talked about income protection. Before you go into any quotes, you start off with this, you preempt it. So, Mr. Customer, the great news is income protection literally can't be too expensive for you, because we can keep tweaking the figures and the numbers until you get the cover you need at a price that you could definitely afford. How can you object?
I love that. And that's what I love about income protection, is that it's such a flexible plan that you can make all those adjustments and you'll always find something that works for the client's budget, right? I think that's really, really good. So yeah, I can't afford it. I mean, it's an interesting one because I think it kind of implies that the client doesn't know that you know about their circumstances. I mean, I was saying, think back to an advisor. You're actually going through, typically, if you've done your job properly, you've gone through a budget planner with the client. Now, the budget planner gives you a wonderful snapshot of what the client's got coming in and also then what they're going out. So it does a couple of things, really. One, it shows the money coming in, but it also highlights everything that's going out and what they need to make sure they've got every month just to maintain an acceptable lifestyle and pay the things that they've listed in that budget planner. So I think that's the first thing to focus on, is that actually that kind of gives you a very good grounding and that you can see what they've got. But also what it does very conveniently, show you the disposable income they've got at the end. So if someone says, I can't afford it, you can quite categorically prove that they can, because we can see what disposable income they've got at the end of it. But I think sometimes when people are questioning the value of a plan like that, what I try to do as well is break it down into a daily cost. So often when we talk about, £100 a month, £120 a month, that can seem like quite a lot to somebody. But then when you break it down to a daily cost, and it costs the same as, say, a cup of coffee, or I know a Tesco's meal deal, for example, but to give them lifelong financial security, when you break it down like that, suddenly it seems very affordable and very realistic. And you mustn't forget, how do they pay for the coffee or the Tesco's meal deal with the same income that still needs protecting? So yeah, there's some great, I love what you're saying there. I love the idea. I haven't used that calculator, so I'm definitely going to have a go at doing that with some of my clients, but really good one. So let's move on to the next one. What's the next objection that we're going to talk about?
Okay, I've never been off sick before. Yeah, this comes up quite often. And it's often a perception that customers think they're bulletproof. And just because they haven't been off sick for a long time, they like to think that's never going to happen to them.
Absolutely. It's this thing about optimism bias, isn't it? This idea that we get up every day and we're fine. And so we use past experiences as a guide for the future, which, as we know, even if you think about investments and things, that's never going to be the case. So what do you normally do when someone says, oh, I've never been off sick? How do you normally tackle that one?
Right. Firstly, I always say to them, you're ensuring your health for the next 30 years, not the last 30 years. Because we all get more ill as we get older, right? So I'm reminding them of that. I then break the length of the mortgage down into months. So let's say, for example, they've never been off sick. I'll say, look, the good news is, the news is your 25-year mortgage actually means you have to find the money to pay the mortgage and all of your bills every month for 300 months in a row. And you've only got enough sick pay to cover 2 of them. Are you willing to risk everything that you won't be off sick over the next 25 years?
Absolutely. That's actually really good. I love breaking it down to month. It's a bit like what I was doing previously about breaking the price down, because then it becomes a more manageable figure and it's a lot more contextual in that respect. You see, I think this idea that I've never been sick before, we've got to do, I quite like to challenge people's perceptions around optimism bias, because we know that people think that way when they shouldn't, and it's not a good indicator of the future. So one of the ways I do it is, and I quite like this one, but for example, you and I are sitting here and I say to you, well, 1 in 2 people are likely to get cancer. That means it's either going to be you or it's going to be me. But the way optimism bias works is that I think it's going to be you and you think it's going to be me. But one of us is going to get it in theory, right? Yeah. Now, what that does, it just challenges this perception around being too optimistic, and actually we need to be a bit more realistic. I remember I once heard an advisor who's really, this is very assertive, but I heard this one advisor say to someone who was saying, oh, I don't get sick, I don't need time off, I've not been ill. He said, okay, well, no worries. I'll tell you what then, you phone me up the week before you do get ill, and you let me know and I'll put the plan in place for you then. And again, that challenges that perception around, oh, it's not going to happen to me. But I think one really clever way of tackling I've never been off sick is reminding people about something that we've lived through recently that indicates that we weren't expecting it to happen, but it did. And that's COVID. So COVID was something that we all kind of went through together. You were overseas at the time and it's changed your life completely. Yeah. But the whole point is that COVID was something that we couldn't have predicted. None of us were expecting. It came out of nowhere. We all experienced it. But then when that happened, what the government did was introduced furlough. And what's really interesting about that is it was a non-expected experience and the government response was to do furlough. Now, what's furlough? It's national income protection, right? That's the way you got to think about it. So what that example does very well is highlights actually, we can't assume things aren't going to happen to us. It doesn't matter whether you've been sick or not been sick. It just means things can happen to you without your control. But actually, how important income is in that scenario, because that's what the government did to avoid millions of people losing their homes and starving to death. So really interesting.
That's great advice, Matt. Now, hopefully nobody will be struggling to handle that kind of objection after this.
Let's hope so. So next on our hit list is, I don't need IP, I get good sick pay through work.
this is a real common one. Because the problem is, if someone's got, for example, 6 months full pay, 6 months half, one, the customer thinks it's really good, but more worryingly, most advisors think it's really good. Once the advisor has got that mindset, it'll come through in the tone of voice, body language, how they speak. The customer will know that they don't mean the advice, and that's when you get, can I have a think about it? No, can we get back to you? That sale's gone. So what we need to understand is that 6 months full pay, 6 months half isn't great sick pay. It's just not as bad as most other people's sick pay. So when you've got a mortgage that runs for 300 months, 6 months sick pay is a drop in the ocean.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I love what you said then about a lot of advisors think that that's good as well. And that's a really common misconception. I think we all need to move away from that. And this idea that we all need a lifelong income. Like having income is really important. People don't typically work up until that point and then stop anyway. So it's this idea that, if someone's in their 30s, for example, they might have 30 or 35 years more income left to generate. And if they're off work and they got 6 months, it's nothing. Like you say, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the millions that they could lose in lost income if they couldn't go to work. And I think if you think back to the idea that the average IP claim is roughly 7 years is what they think now. Well, I mean, 6 months is neither here nor there. It's not even going to scratch the surface of that situation. You see, I think when it comes to this one, I think there's the common misconception, as you've rightly pointed out, mate, is that advisors seem to think it's a barrier to sell. When someone comes into the room and says, oh, I'll get really good sick pay, or that they work for the NHS, the council, they're a teacher, that immediately that's a barrier to sell. You see, I completely disagree. For me, it's a tool to be used and leveraged to help you sell full-term income cover, because what you can say to that individual is, look, the fact that you get such sick pay is brilliant. And I do like to preempt it, by the way, but like you said previously, I like to preempt this issue and I like to go in there before the client raises the objection and say, listen, the fact that you get such great sick pay is brilliant. It's fantastic, because what it means we can get you full-term, lifelong protection. So total financial resilience for the rest of your working life, way cheaper than it would be for a normal person, say a self-employed builder who already gets, a couple of days sick pay, if any at all. And so what you do is you say you have to take advantage of that sick pay to get access to full-term cover at much cheaper rates. And what you're really trying to do in that scenario is turn what would probably be a barrier and objection into a tool to help you sell the value of the plan. Would you do anything differently?
Unbelievably, my approach is almost identical, which I was
It clearly works
then. I was smiling, yeah. So again, if a customer says, I don't need cover, I've got 6 months full pay, 6 months half, what advisors tend to want to do is try and overcome the objection. There's no need to. Use it to your advantage. So if they say, I got 6 months full pay, I don't need it, you don't try and win an argument with them. Well, you might change employers, you might be off for more than 6 months. It's an old-fashioned and combative way of speaking to a customer.
Right.
For that to go on, you have to beat the customer in a war of words. You have to prove them that he is wrong. That is not the best way to get someone to take on board your advice. So I tend to do the same as you. I'll disturb them by once again using the mortgage term in years, like this. Now, the good news, Mr. Customer, you've got sick pay with work. But here's my main concern. Your 25-year mortgage actually means you have to pay the mortgage and all the bills for 300 months in a row. And you've only got enough sick pay to cover 6. That's potentially 294 months. You couldn't afford to pay your mortgage and your bills. And then I say, but the great news is we're going to use all that free cover you got with work. It's going to save you a fortune. I can't wait to show you how much you're going to save. And you've used it as the sales tool, not a barrier to sales.
No, I love that. And again, using that monthly breakdown to highlight actually how little it is relative to how long they need it for. It's the same with kind of like working years, as we talked about at the beginning. I really like that, Garen. And like you rightly said, I think this is hopefully the message that we're getting out to the advisors out there, that when you come across that scenario, it's more of a thing to be used to your advantage rather than something that's going to hopefully disrupt your sales process. Now, I love that. So I guess the next one I want to talk about is employee benefits. This is one I've come up with quite a few times. So,
right, yeah. So how would you deal with someone who says they've got group income protection?
Yes, again, a lot of people think that's really, really good. And I think the first thing I like to do is I like to just remind the client actually that often it's probably not what they think they're getting. So I've put in the example we were talking about previously about, when you're looking at group income protection, a lot of it I've found recently isn't full-term cover anyway, which is kind of what we're talking about the client needs up until the end of their retirement age. So often it's, a couple of years. And what's really good now is lots of providers are coming out with products that mean that we can dovetail these employee benefits. So even if it's group income protection, if it's only for 2 or even 5 years, we can now dovetail that with a full-term income protection plan. It's going to be very, very cost effective. So even if they didn't want to consider having their own plan that runs at the same time as a group scheme, we could potentially dovetail offset it in the same way that we would with sick pay, like we were talking about a minute ago. But I think for me, the real key here is just kind of like disrupting and really getting to grips with the client's potential relationship or their perspective on the relationship they've got with their employer. So one thing I love to do to challenge is I sort of say to clients, look, this is great to have. It's brilliant. It's like a bonus almost, but we shouldn't rely on it. And the reason we shouldn't rely on it is because ultimately it's at the employer's discretion. So unless that employee is opting in and paying for it themselves, it's usually a non-contractual benefit, meaning the employer can pull it at any time. It's at their discretion. They might remove it. But ultimately, if they move jobs, and it used to be we'd get a job for life, right? You'd join an employer and you'd stay there till you retire and you get a little gold Rolex at the end of it. Well, these days, people are fairly transient. They move from job to job in order to get career progression. And so I kind of remind the client that that benefit only exists whilst they remain with that employer. And then if they did want to take out their own cover at this point, the premium will have gone up significantly with age. And if they've experienced any health concerns whilst under that group scheme, it could make it very hard, very costly, or even impossible for them to get cover later. But there's one little thing I like to touch on more than anything. It's the psychological thing, and it's to do with the relationship they have with their employer. Now, they're already reliant on their employer for their day-to-day salary, which is the thing that pays for everything they've got. And then we're trying to ensure that salary. But if they're then relying on the employer again for the protection that comes when that salary stops, it just feels like they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And so I like to just challenge them on that and kind of say, look, why would you want to leave your financial destiny? Why would you want to leave your financial security to your employer? Now, what if you fall out with them? What if you want to leave? What if something goes wrong? Surely it's best to take back control of your own financial situation, secure your own financial resilience, and do it in the way that you want to do it. And that's like pushing back to them taking out their own personal plan. What about yourself? I mean, if you come across this one, what do you tend to do?
Okay, well, I loved what you said. I wouldn't change a word there. It was really good. Okay, now, the other thing I do, which links back to the last example, was don't try and win them in a war of words. Well, if you change employers, it might go, because you're being combative and the customer tends to want to defend their position. So you lean into it. I show an enthusiasm. Oh, fantastic. Can you send me the document? I'll have a good look at all through that for you. We'll see how good it is. And then after I've looked through it, I'll build my advice around that. Now, they're not expecting that because you haven't tried to beat them. You've been their friend and you're looking at it. And the plus side is you get a chance to look at the documentation, because customers, I haven't met a customer that knows the exact details of their benefits with work.
No, not at all.
They're all winging it. So if you've got the documentation, you're talking facts to them. So if you, for example, some schemes can lay you off whilst being off sick. Well, that's awful. But you're coming from a concrete position when you give your advice. So that's the other tip I have, is get the documentation, take your time to go through it, and then present your advice. It's a much stronger position to come from.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good point, because often when you do look through the documentation, it's never quite what they think, is it? And then you can offer your thoughts and guides around it. But I really love what you're saying there. And the psychological side of that, so that's to do with that client relationship, is about, not deliberately trying to battle the client. And I think that's a really important point around all these objections, that often it's not about battling the client, it's about winning that hearts and minds, isn't it? To try and get around it and show them that, that's brilliant. That's really positive, showing the positive side of it, but then using logical arguments to help make your point. And that's a really, really good point, Gary.
And the final objection we're going to handle today is that old doozy. I don't need income protection. My family will pay for me.
Oh, yeah. This is, probably my favorite. I absolutely love this one, because I think this is the one where clients have really demonstrated they've got no kind of understanding about what you're talking about. And this actually has come across quite a lot. I encountered this a few times. Now, if you want a really aggressive, assertive way of doing it, I remember one I actually did with a client. Now, this is a bit much for some people, but I will share it with you. Client turned around to me and said, "Oh, no, I don't need any of that. My parents will take care of me. My parents will pay for it. My parents will do this. My parents will do that." They'd already helped them with the deposit on the house, and they were kind of really adamant their parents were going to do it. So my response was, absolutely no problem at all. Yeah, fine. All I need you to do is get your parents to come in here and sign this disclaimer to say that they will take care of all of your bills and cover all your expenses when you can't work. Do you think they did that? Not a chance in hell. They took the cover, right? I appreciate that's a little bit aggressive, so apologies if everyone thinks that's a bit much, but it's definitely a hardcore way of pushing back on the client. But, you know, if that is a little bit assertive, there is a slightly better, softer way that you can deal with it. And I know you've got your own examples, and I'm definitely going to come to that in a minute because I'd love to hear how you deal with it. But one way I do tend to do it is kind of, I play to the client's emotional side. I say, well, why would you really want to put your parents, through that stress and through that anguish? And why would you honestly, as an independent person living on your own, trying to make your own way in the world, why would you kind of want to push that back onto your parents and make them responsible? And I think what I say to them then is kind of give them a bit of an exit ramp to try and close the sale. And what you can say to them is at this point, you can say, well, look, rather than getting your clients to spend however many thousands of pounds it would be to pay your bills every month, wouldn't it just be better and way more cost effective for them to pay the premiums for the plan that I'm recommending in the short term? That way, when you're ready, you can take over paying the premiums yourself and you can take responsibility for it, but it's going to save them a lot of money in the short term and mean they don't have to pay thousands out if something happens to you. So hopefully that's a way, if they are adamant their parents are going to pay for something, finding a more cost-effective way to make their parents pay where they actually do get the cover they need. What about yourself? I mean, how would you normally handle that one?
I love that last bit. I actually have done the same thing.
Okay.
No, so the reason this is happening is normally it's a first-time buyer. That's where the parents are coming in, right? The parents are helping their child buy their first house, possibly. So they want to help. So they naturally tend to overprotect, saying, don't worry, save money, I'll pay for everything. Well, there's no thought process there. No. So my way is slightly less aggressive than your way. So I tell my advisors to basically to play to it. So the child who's buying the house, obviously they're close with the family. That's why it's happening. So I play on that relationship, similar to you, by saying, do you really want that burden to go on? So what I do is say, look, that's really good that they love you enough to want to do that. But how old is your dad now? Let's say he says 55. And how long is your mortgage? 30 years. So do you really want to put the burden of supporting you and paying your mortgage and all your bills when your father is 85 years old?
That's powerful.
And then I give them the choice again of saying, look, so let's go back to this. Or if you really care, if you want us to help, there's a much cheaper way. And I recommend that. And you do often get it because the dad hasn't thought through £1,500 a month for 30 odd years. A small premium on income protection is a nice way of helping the child without breaking the bank.
Absolutely. It plays that idea, isn't it? It's, you know, that I know that it comes from a place of good intentions. I know the parents trying to do something helpful, but it's just kind of like putting that real world scenario. And I think often that it's that logic-based argument we keep talking about that helps overcome objections, where you're not trying to combat, like you said, I love what you're saying, by the way, not combating with the client, kind of pulling them in and then using logic and working with them to come to that conclusion. I think that's always going to be the best way to handle objections. I think that's really, really good. I like that one. It's very powerful, that one. Yeah, very good.
Well, hopefully the tips we've given you today will help you to enter into an IP conversation with more confidence and the ability to overcome any and all objections that are thrown at you.
Absolutely. Now, as a final piece of advice, I would encourage you guys to try and build a library of appropriate responses to objections by documenting each time you get one and how you feel you could have handled it better, because this will help you refine your skills and hopefully develop really effective responses and methods for tackling any objections you come across.
I'd echo that, Matt. Just watching this video once and trying to remember everything we're going through will not work. Write them down, practice your scripts, and revise ones that you go wrong, and keep practicing, and you will get better.
100%. Brilliant. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks.
Brilliant. So we somehow managed to get back home, Gary. That happened very quickly. Amazing. But based on what we just talked about in the studio, should we show the guys a couple of actual case studies of what we've just talked about in practice?
Yeah, let's see how this plays out in a real life situation.
Let's take a look at how a typical conversation takes place. Now, in this scenario, the advisor has gone through a budget planner with the client to understand how much income they need each month and has begun to recommend an income protection policy. So let's see what normally happens as soon as the client raises an objection.
So given how important income is to be able to maintain your lifestyle and pay all of your bills, I am recommending that you take out income protection policy to replace your income if you are unable to work due to an illness or an injury. The plan I am recommending to you provides a maximum level of replacement income available to you based on your annual earnings, which provide an income after 4 weeks of you being off work. The cost of this plan is £124.68 per month.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. It's more than I'd budgeted, really. I'm sorry, I just don't think I can afford that.
Well, okay. Thing is, this is what I'm recommending you take out because you need an income each month, right?
Well, yes, but there's just no way I can afford to pay that.
All right. No worries. Let's look at something else and a bit cheaper.
Now, in this case, the advisor got stumped as soon as the client raised an objection to cost. Thing is, these are actually really easy to overcome. So let's look at two different ways in which the advisor could have easily overcome this objection using simple logic-based arguments.
Yeah, so hi, Hannah. Now we're coming to a really important part of my advice and what you can see exactly what I mean. So your new mortgage comes in at £1,200 per month. And when we add in your monthly outgoings, this actually means to simply survive every month, you need £2,150 per month. You currently have no sick pay at the moment, and for any reason that you're off work, you drop right down to statutory sick pay with the government benefits. Now, here's my big concern. You've got a 35-year mortgage, which actually means to pay your mortgage and your bills for the next 420 months in a row, and you haven't got enough sick pay to cover this, have you?
Right, yeah, I guess so.
I'm sure you can see now why this is such an important issue. But don't worry, this is exactly why when income protection is here to fix the problem. And based on the seriousness of this problem, I am recommending the maximum monthly benefit at £2,500, which comes in at a cost of £124.68 per month.
Right, I mean, that is quite a lot. That's way more than I'd budgeted. I don't really think that I can afford that, Andy.
Yeah, no problem. Let me just share my screen. Just give me 1 second. So can you see your outgoings up there on the screen?
I can, yes.
Great. So obviously mortgages in there at £1,200. You've got your utilities at £200, food at £300, mobile phones £50, TV, Wi-Fi, broadband. We can't live without that, can we? £30. Car running costs £180. You've got your pet insurance, car, home insurance, all in one at £70. And then hobbies and interests and your gym membership is £120. So I've put income protection in there at the bottom at £124.68. So now can you kind of see where the benefit comes in on that?
Yes, yeah, I can.
Okay, great. So as you can see, we've gone through all of your income and expenditure, and at the bottom there, I put £124.68. So even with this included, you're comfortably inside your current take-home pay at £3,000. Now, let's paint a picture. What would happen if you were off work at some point over the next 35 years? All of these outgoings would immediately become a problem. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I say so.
Yeah. So this is because all of them would continue to demand a payment, except for income protection, which the payment would stop because you made a claim. Not only would it pay for itself, but you would also be able to pay every single item on that list, making sure that you and your husband and the boys could continue to live your lives. So it's actually one of the most important outgoings you could ever have, because without nothing else gets paid.
Yeah, I guess when you put it that way, you're absolutely right. I can't really believe that I haven't got the cover already. So yeah, I think we should definitely set it up.
No problem. I'll get that sorted for you now.
Thank you.
This is another common objection that trips up so many advisors. Let's say your customer has 6 months full and 6 months half pay. So not only do they think they have awesome cover, but very often the actual advisor also thinks they have awesome cover. This can often result in a conversation like this.
The next thing I want to talk about is income protection insurance. Now, because you're a teacher, you've already got good cover with work. However, if you were ever sick for more than 6 months, you'd drop down to half pay for 6 months, and then your cover would stop. If this was to happen, income protection insurance would start paying you out a monthly income, tax-free, which would help you pay your mortgage and your bills. Is this something you've ever thought about?
Not really. As you say, I've already got great sick pay, so I don't really need this cover.
Okay. But what if you were off sick for 12 months or more? What would you do then?
I'd be fine. I've never been off ever a day sick in my life, really.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on to the next part of my advice.
Okay, so what we're doing in this example is really bringing the massive IP shortfall to life before going anywhere near the quote. This makes it much more likely for the customer to see the maximum cover as absolutely essential. However, if they still say, I can't afford it, we come back with a very strong answer.
You see, your employer's sick pay covers you for up to a year. But after that, you'll be in real financial difficulty, mainly because the bills won't stop, even if you do.
Okay.
But the good news is that your excellent sick pay means you'll have access to some of the best deals available. It's because the cost of the income cover that you need is linked to how quickly you need it to kick in. So the longer you wait, the cheaper it usually becomes.
Oh, just didn't know that.
Yeah, sort of makes sense, I suppose. But imagine you're a self-employed builder and you need this policy to kick in after 4 weeks. The insurer is going to charge you so much more because of the risk of you claiming is going to be so much higher.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So, but because you get such good sick pay from your employer, we can take advantage of that and delay how quickly you need the plan to kick in and arrange lifelong income security for you much cheaper than it would cost, somebody that needs a shorter waiting period, like the builder, for example.
Yeah.
So think of it more like extending your sick pay with your employer rather than replacing it. You get the cover you want at a fraction of the cost. It might be, for someone else. Because you get great benefits, you can use them to your advantage. The key here is to make sure you've always got lifelong financial protection, but do it in the most cost-effective way possible. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So isn't 12 months long enough then?
Not at all, no. Remember, we agreed that you need this income until you retire. But also it's worth noting that the average income protection claim typically lasts longer than 7 years. So 12 months isn't enough to cover the average person in that scenario.
Yeah, that's crazy. I literally had no idea. But yeah, okay, let's do it.
Great.
So to make that presentation even better, here is another cool little tip. When you're prepping your quotes for 6 months full, 6 months half, always run off an extra quote with no deferred period or a 4-week deferred period. Because when you show the customer their premiums, show them the 4-week deferred period quote as well and emphasize how much you've saved them. If his quote comes in at £124, but the other quote is £200, it will look like an absolute bargain.
I'll think about it, I suppose, is the first one, which is not a real objection. It's they've perhaps not quite understood what you said and or want to take it in. Okay, so they want to actually buy it off you, but they're just not quite sure. So it's actually about asking them a few more questions just to understand what it is that they're thinking about. And quite often it is, what do you think about the cover? And they'll tell you, or they might not tell you in the right way. They may have understood something or may tell you perfectly. And then if they have understood it, then perhaps the next thing is price. So is the price okay for you? And they'll tell you generally up or down. Listen to their tone of voice though, okay? Because they might say, yeah, it's great. But what they actually mean is it's a bit high, So by asking serious questions, you can just take them down the objection handling circle. And then once you've just checked about each individual thing and just checked in with them. So now we've confirmed you're happy with the price, you're happy with the cover, and there's nothing else that you don't understand. When would you like to do your application?
Yeah, I think there's several objections. Normally you know what's coming in terms of clients saying that they don't need it or that they've never been ill, that sort of thing, or their family are going to look after them. So I think it's just a case of going back to them and challenging them on that, asking them, if they've never been ill, have they got family members that have been ill? How long do they expect to live? That sort of thing. Just sort of challenge them a little bit. It can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable, but those objections are normally just misunderstandings. So just go back through it, explain exactly what you're trying to help them with, and help them understand the process and what they're buying into.
With income protection, the two top objections are that their employer gives them money if they're sick, or it's too expensive. So we just explain that 6 months pay can drop very quickly, which is usually what an employer would pay. Waiting lists are long, so depending on the illness, how quickly they can get better or have an operation and get back to work. And how would they feel if they went in when it goes to half pay, if their pay was being slashed in half? That's not comfortable for most people.
And secondly, it's too expensive. If you can't afford the premium right now, then imagine if you had no money because you couldn't work at all. So they are how we get over the objections, but with stories as well interweaved.
Top objections that I generally hear is it won't happen to me. I'm never ill. I won't get sick. How do I overcome that? It is a hard one, but I do explain to people that anybody can have an accident. You don't have to be sick for your income protection policy to actually help you. That's my biggest objection, if I'm honest. Anything else, like cost, we can overcome cost, can't we? Because there's loads of options for clients these days, whether they have full benefit term or just a short term, either 12-month or 24-month term. Quite often when I show people the different options, they end up wanting the full benefit period.
So the top objection that I'm getting at the moment is cost driven. I'm having a lot of clients where mortgage offers have expired, they're having to be requoted, and in some instances the jump is quite significant, so it then shrinks the budget even more for what we're trying to allocate towards protection. Lots of people, when they do their budget plan prior to coming to a mortgage advisor, they don't factor in insurance. They might factor in buildings and contents, but not their personal protection. So it does make it a bit difficult because sometimes there's really small margins to work with. That then goes kind of hand in hand with, well, I don't need it, I don't see the point. I get sick pay through work, which is great. A lot of them don't know what their sick pay is. So I can usually get past that objection quite easily because they say they have quite good sick pay. They look at their contract and they get 10 days. So that's an easier one to kind of overcome because they then almost tell themselves the need because it's there in front of them, black and white. You're not going to get paid full pay after 10 days. So that's an easier one to overcome, but I am realistic in the sense that budgets are just so tight for everybody at the moment.
Really, there's two. The first one is about I don't need it, which I'm sure everyone else on the panel will say. To be honest, I use personal experiences. My father passed away before 60. He had some things. He always used to say he was never going to get ill. So bringing it to life for people. And the other is financial. And unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't much we can do about the cost of these products and the fact that everyone is feeling the pinch. So just making sure that they understand that from an advisor perspective, I'm not trying to force them to take everything out. It's these are the risks that you've presented. These are the things that you can do to protect those risks. Now let's prioritise those and make sure that we cover the most important ones within your budget.
The top objection that we hear is that they can't afford it. So generally we tend to go through a budget, we look at their bank statements, we see what they spend their money on, and then we ask how they would survive if they didn't have their income to pay for the things that they love paying for. The cost of living's increased so much that we've had a lot of people contacting us regarding what they would do if they didn't have their income. So obviously if their bills are now higher, and so we're tending to find that a lot more people want income protection to try and replace their income because their bills are so much higher.
So the top objection I normally hear from the client is that they've already got income protection in place. I usually say that's great that you've got protection already, but it's good to just get you in and review that protection. A lot of things can change over the years, so it's good to just make sure that your income protection is still meeting your needs.
My example is from a business protection point of view, so executive income protection. So when it comes to asking, speaking to a director where they'll feedback that they would just continue to pay themselves a wage, where they could just become a drain on the business. They might want to employ someone new. So instead of having that burden on the business, if they were incapacitated and not working, why not just pay for an insurance policy which would protect their income? And that's what I feed back to them and hopefully get them over the line.
Wow, so that was day 3 of IPAW, and so far this week we've covered how to get started, find clients and raise your profile, how to prepare for effective meetings and consider the needs of your clients, and now how to overcome a whole host of objections. Day 4 is coming up tomorrow, and we'll be exploring the next stage of the advisor journey, including some top tips for underwriting and how to make the process as straightforward as possible. Make sure you tune in for an enlightening discussion on claims and the support offered. There's still time to register for the rest of the sessions this week. Visit iptf.co.uk or our LinkedIn page where we've shared the links regularly. Better still, sign up for our email newsletter via our website and all this information will come to you. Thank you to everyone who's been part of today's session, and my colleague Andrew Wibberley will be back with you tomorrow, so be sure to tune in at midday.